Hello and welcome to another episode of Schlock Tactics, the movie podcast where we believe badder is better and aim to review the bogus Bond films so that you don't have to. My name's Ash and I'm joined once again by Mark. Oh, hi Mark.
Good evening.
For new listeners, if you don't know what we do here, we take two films that are similar in genre or franchise, and two films that aren't necessarily very good, and compare them to each other, what's good, what's really bad, and decide which is the better bad film. Last episode that we did, it was a Turkish special. As I'd just gotten back from Turkey, we reviewed the Turkish versions of Star Wars and Rambo. Quite difficult films for you to find online, to be fair, but people did seem to find it funny us talking about it. So if you want to hear more about how the Turkish have interpreted the Star Wars and the Rambo franchises, check out the last episode that we did. But today we are back to films that are much easier for you to see and films that you probably will have seen. It is a James Bond special. We'll be reviewing Moonraker and Die Another Day. Are you a big fan of the Bond films, Mark?
I'd say I'm a moderate fan of the Bond films.
Seen a few?
I just don't think I've seen all of them, but I've seen a reasonable number of them.
Who's your favourite Bond?
Probably Roger Moore.
That's the correct answer.
It's close between him and Sean Connery, really.
Yeah.
But I really like The Man with the Golden Gun and The Spy Who Loved Me, and
yeah,
I just think he's the most suave and sophisticated Bond.
And even when his films are terrible, he can still kind of get away with it because he's Roger Moore and he's camp and he's ludicrous and not really trying to be serious anyway. So yeah, my favourite Bond as well, which is why I've gone for Moonraker rather than perhaps Diamonds Are Forever, which is also a terrible Sean Connery film, or some of the more pants Pierce Brosnan ones. There are other ones, but Moonraker and Die Another Day, a Roger Moore and a Pierce Brosnan entry. So first we'll get into Moonraker. That's from 1979. If you remember the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, it actually said that James Bond would return in For Your Eyes Only. But what happened, much like Turkish Star Wars, is that Star Wars happened and the film studios decided, we got to get a piece of this action. So they actually jigged around the production and adapted Moonraker instead, which is also an Ian Fleming book as well. The budget of this film was $34 million, which is more than the first 6 Bond films combined.
Wow.
So that's all of Sean Connery's films combined on a patch on the budget of this film. But yeah, Moonraker opens here with Boeing 747 flying at some height with the Moonraker shuttle just sort of piggybacking on top of it. But that's what's happening, and the Moonraker shuttle is hijacked by some bad guys. At the same time, our James Bond, Roger Moore, is on a sort of a more private jet, and he's on his last legs. No, he's not dying. He's having a feel of a lovely lady. But
perfect transition between.
Yeah. He's double-crossed by this air hostess with the lovely legs. He's forced to skydive out of the plane, quickly followed by Jaws, who has returned from The Spy Who Loved Me. The only henchman to appear in two Bond films back to back, and certainly played by the same actor. Were you familiar with Jaws from his work in The Spy Who Loved Me?
Yeah, he was on the train, and Bond sticks a lamp in his mouth, and it kind of electrocutes his metal teeth.
That's it.
That's like the main bit I remember.
And there's a bit with sharks as well at the end of that film where he fights a shark. So straight away we've got a really impressive and probably really expensive scene here where James Bond and Jaws skydive. They free fall all the way down from this aeroplane. Obviously this is not the actors at any point really, and this is stuntmen, and they wrestle until eventually Jaws goes flying into a circus. And then we get the opening credits. Another return here. Shirley Bassey has come back for one more Bond theme. This is her third Bond theme, and undoubtedly the worst that she's done. One of the worst ones overall, I would say, or maybe just forgettable. But it's no Goldfinger, and it's no Diamonds Are Forever in terms of how iconic and memorable those themes are. I think they pushed Bassey too far, and she didn't have a third one in here really. Yeah,
I can't remember already, and I watched this film last night. So.
There's a bit where she goes, "A Moonraker."
Tried to go Diamonds Are Forever and replace it with Moonraker.
Well, most of those themes, like they say the name of the film in a really memorable way, like Golden Eye or Goldfinger. But this one is Moonraker. No, it's completely forgettable, like you say. We get our usual opening trawl where Bond goes to see Q, the quartermaster, and gives him some gadgets. Again, it's usually a watch. In both of these films, it's a watch that he gets given, at the very least. And this one fires darts, both cyanide-tipped and armour-piercing. Loads of exposition here about what the plot of this film is going to be. There's a guy called Hugo Drax, who is going to be the Bond villain for this film. Again, a pretty forgettable Bond villain as well.
Yeah,
I've already forgotten his face.
Yeah, I don't remember this guy. I've seen this film before.
It's weird. He's such a forgettable Bond villain, but his ultimate goal is to wipe out everybody on Earth, pretty much. So he's arguably the most evil of Bond villains. But he runs things out of California, and really his goal here is the conquest of space. Bond is introduced to our Bond girl in this film, who is Dr. Goodhead. One of the less subtle dick jokes in the Bond franchise, Dr. Goodhead. It's such a massive dick joke on its own that he doesn't even feel the need to really make any more jokes on it.
Why add to it?
Goodhead. Yeah. Oh, and when he's introduced to Dr. Goodhead, he goes, "I'm looking for Dr. Goodhead," and she's like, "Yes, you found her." And he's like disgusted straight away. "A woman?" And she's like, "Yes." Oh, God.
A female doctor?
I can't believe it. A woman. But then obviously he starts thinking, "Oh, hang on. I know what I can do with women." But yeah, she takes him for some astronaut training, because it's one of the things that Drax does in his corporation here. And we get this really memorable scene. For me, I've always remembered this scene where he gets put in the centrifuge chamber.
It's probably the most memorable scene of the whole film.
It's really great, yeah. And he gets to go round and round and experience G-force in the way that astronauts would if they were in outer space. We've all seen this device before in other things.
Yeah.
You know, when Homer Simpson wants to become an astronaut, he has to go through it as well.
Yeah.
When he's going through it, an evil Asian man tampers with the controls and makes it go 10 times as fast as you're meant to go, and messes with his face and everything like that. Next up, we go to Venice, where I think most of my favourite stuff in the film happens here in Venice. He goes to a glass workshop. He sees a lovely lady on the front desk, and she says, "Do you see anything you like?" And he says, "Well, I'm tempted to say yes immediately, but I guess I'd better take a look around." And she says, "Oh, that's fine. Go anywhere you like." So the next scene, he's just wandering about in like the foundry in the workshop, watching people blow glass. It's like, this isn't a thing in shops. Go anywhere you like. Oh, there's a really weird shot of Roger Moore standing behind this glass sort of bulb, and it makes his head look really massive. Speaking of head, it's Goodhead again. She's in the glass workshop. "What are you doing here?" And she explains she's come to do some sort of astronaut talk because she also works for NASA, but we know that's probably not true. And he's trying to track down these sort of hexagonal glass tubing that he saw the schematics for at Drax's mansion. It goes really crazy here. So basically, Bond gets in a gondola and starts just being pushed through the canals of Venice, but it all really gets mental.
A guy comes out of a coffin.
Yeah. So a funeral gondola drives past. I had no idea there was such a thing as a funeral gondola. The presumably dead body pops out of the coffin and starts shooting him. So he shoots him and then he falls back in the coffin. So that's that. And then the funeral gondola, which is meant to be a normal thing in Venice, goes under a low-bearing bridge, which knocks the coffin into the water. And then as the coffin's like floating past, we get this completely irrelevant shot of an old man looking over the bridge and just coughing loads. He's like smoking a fag and he's like, and he looks at the coffin and he keeps walking. What's that? It's insane. Then we come up to a part of I didn't know they had traffic lights in Venice either, but he comes up to some traffic lights of gondolas and there's a bit of a malfunction. He cuts right through some guy's gondola.
Oh yeah.
And there's just the guy with the pole, the driver, I guess,
trying to stay afloat. Like
he's just slowly sinking, and his face he pulls he might be the best actor in the film. He's going down and he's like, oh. It's brilliant. If you can find that scene.
and the other half of the boat has the couple, and they're just sinking as well.
Couple are just getting off with each other, floating away. As if that wasn't ridiculous enough, it gets more ridiculous. Bond arrives at the sort of steps of this square, and he goes to his control panel. I don't know if you got a good look at this control panel. I paused it. There are a number of buttons. One button for turbo, one button for skirt.
I didn't notice that.
So he pushes the turbo button, and the gondola turns into a hovercraft. And he pushes the skirt button, and this little sort of skirting comes out of the hovercraft as well. And he just goes zzz. I think there are three Roger Moore films in a row where he does something ludicrous, and then it cuts to a guy that's drinking, who then like looks at the bottle and looks back at the scene, and as if to say like, "Oh man, I've got to stop drinking." It happened in Spy Who Loved Me when he comes out of the water in the car. Yeah. There's a guy looking at like a bottle that has like XXX on it and goes like, "Oh no." So that happens. There's the famous double take pigeon that just like they manipulate the footage to make it look like the pigeon is like doing a double take, but not really. There's a waiter that's just pouring like beer down someone's shoulder because he's distracted. Yeah, this all happens in about a minute and a half. To rewind a few times. It's all like raucous slapstick carry on sort of stuff. Like it's not the sort of stuff you usually get in a Bond film, even the campier ones.
Driving a boat along concrete while all this ridiculous stuff happens around him.
Yeah, it was very comedic, and I kind of liked it just because it was so much at once. He naturally goes to have a drink with a lovely lady, meeting up with Goodhead again. She's also got gadgets, so she's also a bit of a secret agent, and she says that maybe they should pool their resources, which means have sex. And to do this, they need to go off to Rio de Janeiro. So we're off again. London to California to Venice and now to Rio. You can see why this film cost $34 million. Next up is probably the most famous scene in this film, the cable car scene. So this is where Bond and Goodhead are looking to take a cable car from sort of one point here down to a sort of rock in the sea. And when they're halfway down, Jaws goes up to the control room and starts chomping through the cables so that they'll plummet to their death. The cables in this scene are made of licorice. That's how he's able to bite them. That's trivia. Once he bites through the cables, Jaws ends up climbing into the cable car, and they have a bit of a fight in the cable car. Bond is like, I know, let's go on top of the cable car. That'll be better.
There's a bit where Bond says, like, explains to the woman, like, really bluntly, his name's Jaws, he kills people.
Yeah. He does. He's killed quite a few people by this point, yeah. But just before Jaws is about to get them in the cable car, really ridiculously, Bond gets this chain around the cable and they do a zip line. Yeah. Like from all the way at the top, all the way to just a nice like grassy outcrop where they can sort of have a bit of a lie down and a relax. But Jaws stays in the cable car and it smashes into the station at the other end. And he's sort of trapped under this massive wheel, and you think, oh, that's it for Jaws then. And then this sort of tiny blonde woman with pigtails turns up. Quite strong. She helps to lift this metal wheel off of Jaws. And then you get the classic... Da, 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 da,
they immediately fall in love.
They fall in love at first sight, and straight away you see the humanity of Jaws. He falls in love with this girl. I believe the character's called Dolly. And off they go. So that's them done for a while. Bond and Goodhead then are abducted by evil paramedics on the mountainside.
Oh, yeah.
They're able to escape from this ambulance here. And then it turns into a cowboy film for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. Bond is in a poncho on a horseback.
Yeah, Bond is Clint Eastwood, and it's spaghetti western music, and he's on a horse, and you're like, what the fuck has happened? Where are we meant to be now? Either this is meant to be Brazil still? I don't know. But then we realise he's actually heading to an MI6 sort of headquarters in Brazil, or wherever we are. And there's this quite funny monastery where there are like monks doing karate on each other, and there's monks firing lasers at the wall and stuff like that, which is quite funny. Any of these sort of headquarter scenes are always funny stuff going on in the background. And then Q's there as well. And Bond walks up to Q and goes, "Balls, Q?" Because Q has got, I don't know what are they called, the things where you have like balls attached to string, and it's like what cowboys use.
Yeah. But they explode.
But they explode because they're the grenades, I guess.
Yeah.
Straight away, then we're over to the Amazon. We get a speedboat chase, which is pretty cool. We start to get like your uniformed jumpsuit henchmen that you get in Bond films, colour-coded jumpsuit henchmen.
Yeah.
So some of these boats are manned by people who are wearing these sort of banana yellow jumpsuits and weird sort of amateur boxing headgear, which is never explained. Perhaps in the previous films, many henchmen have sort of been undone by head injuries. So Drax has thought, I know, we'll pop them in a little helmet this time.
Yeah.
Some of these speedboats have the facility to let like little spiky mines out the back, and then some of them have people just shooting a mortar, trying to take out each other. It seems like quite a cool little video game here, where everyone's in a speedboat and they've got loads of weapons,
Yeah.
and they have to take each other out. It's quite fun.
Imagine this being a level. If this film were made into a game, this being make a great level.
Wow, part of this film did make it into a game because we're coming up to the pyramid complex.
Of course, yeah.
But before then, James Bond has a hang glider that pops out of his speedboat, which is able to take him sort of up and over the waterfall, but unfortunately Jaws in one of the boats doesn't have a hang glider or anything, and he goes over the falls, so he's dead again.
That's the end of him, surely.
Yeah, again. So Bond is just wandering around the jungle now, and we come across the ruins in the jungle. So if people are familiar with the GoldenEye game, this is one of the best levels in that game, is the sort of Aztec pyramid complex, and it is quite recognisable from that game. A lot of effort being put into this set as well. I could see a lot of the money went into this set and the fake statues of Aztec sort of gods and stuff like that. I thought it was really good effort. As soon as Bond gets there, he's confronted with, I guess, maybe Amazonians, women, basically women from every sort of every part of the world, every sort of race, like about a dozen women just surrounding him, and he's like, oh, here we go. But he ends up getting attacked by a massive like boa constrictor and having to wrestle it in the water.
Pushed into a pool and just
It's not the sexy time he was expecting.
Constricted.
So here are Drax and Jaws in the Aztec pyramid ruins. And we sort of get a bit of his master plan here, Drax. Now it's quite confusing. I don't know if you got a good sense of it. What he wants to do is sort of sterilize planet Earth from outer space. Or he wants to go up. He wants to take loads of really good-looking people into outer space onto this Moonraker station, and then jettison loads of globes of gas back to Earth to kill all the people who he thinks are somehow impure or like not worthy.
Imperfect.
Yeah, imperfect. Yeah. And then him and all his sort of beautiful young people will return.
Repopulate the Earth.
But it's weird because it's not even a case of like, it's not even race sort of based, because there are people of all different like races here. Yeah. They're all good looking and young. I mean, apart from him, he's not. He's like a middle-aged guy, but
I guess they're just all healthy, and I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what his criteria are.
It's this weird it's this weird vision of like, it's not really the master race, it's just about 100 people who are like quite buff and some nice women in miniskirts. Like, this will be the future of Earth, this is what will come back, and everyone from here on then will be beautiful because everyone making the future will be beautiful. It's a strange, I think he's just a bit of a perv, really. I think he wants to be in charge of this repopulation project, and it's just a bit weird. I didn't get a sense of what his master plan was, but what I did understand is that he wanted to kill 99% of people on the Earth, which is about as high as it gets in terms of villainy. Especially in Bond films, they want to like get rich, or they want to like have diamonds and oil and harness the power of the sun, but like this is like, no, I want to kill almost everybody on the planet. Fair play. Stakes are high in this one. It's sort of a Noah's Ark concept, because it was sort of 2 by 2 going onto the shuttle, and there's a bit where you see 2 ginger people kissing. So he's even happy with gingers in the future master race. Like, it's strange.
What is his criteria? I don't understand.
We just don't have time to find out really what that is, and it's not in the book. I guarantee that. So lots of rockets get shot into outer space from the depths of the Amazon, with lots of beautiful people, and they're all going up to the space station.
This is when.
So this is where it gets super Star Wars, as you'd expect. Everything's in zero gravity. Everybody's in a spacesuit. This sort of 2001 music when the space station is turning. It's sort of a pastiche of lots of sci-fi films of the 70s, really. Drax starts launching these globes that have got gas in them that are going to hit various points in the Earth and gas everyone to death. It's around this time that Jaws does what would be known in wrestling as a babyface turn. He turns into a good guy from a bad guy really quickly. He's like pushing people around. He's like grabbing Bond, and then Bond says, "Well, I wonder what your vision of a perfect future will be, and what will happen to anyone who you don't think is perfect."
Jaws realizes.
And Jaws is like, "Hang on, I'm ugly as fuck. What am I gonna do?" And then Drax starts snapping at him, and he realizes, yes, it's true. I am ugly. I will not be allowed to continue in the future race. So it all kicks off then. We get lots of my favourite stuff in Bond films, which is henchmen plummeting off of walkways. Wouldn't be a Bond film if that didn't happen.
Right.
So lots of yellow jumpsuited henchmen just going over these walkways. Bond manages to find like the emergency stop button to stop the entire space station rotating. I don't know why this exists or what possible benefit this could have for Drax, but there is a button, just like on a treadmill. If you start to panic, you can push the big red button and everything stops.
One easily accessible button to stop this whole thing.
So he does press it and everything does stop, and quite violently, and everything starts to sort of explode. This is when the Americans show up, to fashionably late with all their astronauts, and they sort of launch all their astronauts into space with laser guns, and then Drax launches loads of his yellow spacesuit men, and they all start to have like a laser shoot off, but while floating around. So it's like Star Wars, but they're not in spaceships.
Yeah.
Which I think is sort of what made Star Wars quite good, quite believable. What's not believable is about 30 or 40 spacemen just floating around trying to shoot each other in outer space. That's ludicrous. I think what they were trying to do is have like a bit of a battle in space, a bit of a war, like a bit of a Star War, that sort of thing. Bond ends up confronting Drax and putting him in the
vacuum?
Like the emergency evacuation door, like you just press it and you go, and Drax goes flying off into outer space. Everything explodes, I've written. Jaws sacrifices himself so that Bond and Goodhead can escape. Jaws speaks for the first time in the entire thing. I can't remember what he says, can you?
He says he's reunited with the woman that he falls in love with. Yeah. And they drink champagne. And he says something like, "Here's to us." Or
that's it, yeah. Not really worth it. No. Just don't speak. Bond and Goodhead chase down these globes and like shoot them down before they get to Earth. And they save the day. And then they're floating around in their spaceship. Typically, whenever Bond saves the world, he will float around in something, shagging. And we get the MI6 and the CIA, I guess. We're going to make contact with Bond. We're going to beam it live to the White House and Buckingham Palace. And then we just see Bond and Goodhead floating in zero gravity with their blanket on. And what's the punchline?
Q or M or someone says, What's Bond doing? He says, "I think he's attempting re-entry, sir."
Which I think is actually a quality dick joke. Yeah, one of the more quality dick jokes in this film. So there it is, Moonraker. Quite preposterous, certainly in the third act. What were your overall thoughts of Moonraker, Mark?
Oh, it's quite daft. It's kind of like a lot of the less good Bond films. It starts off fairly promising. Then there's a lot of kind of drivel and random stuff happening in the middle of all kinds of wackiness, like Bond being a cowboy, Bond driving a boat through a square
for reasons unclear.
Yeah. And then it sort of ends quite interestingly. I quite enjoyed the spacey parts, even though I didn't really. there wasn't too much depth to what was the plans were or what was going on. But
let's just get in space.
I think I enjoyed the similarity to the Aztec level in GoldenEye. Obviously, this film came way before.
Yeah.
But the people in the yellow suits and the scenery looked really cool.
Yeah. Good sets all around. You can tell it. I think you can tell this cost 34 million. Even in 1979, obviously there wasn't really, the budget didn't really go on special effects. It just went on like location shooting and massive sets, and that's what they did have in this film, like in spades. And yeah, really good set design. Really stupid plot / not really any plot.
Yeah.
The third act is just, like you say, kind of spoils the rest of the movie. The first 2 acts are really quite good, apart from like a bit too much slapstick in the Venice scenes. But like, it globetrots, it moves along, it pushes along. It doesn't really get too boring, as you know, Bond films are never under 2 hours, and sometimes they can get a bit flabby in the middle, like a middle-aged man. But yeah, this one kept up the pace quite well, I thought, and was quite fun and interesting, and it is a good laugh if you watch it with a few mates. So yeah, despite all daftness of shoehorning James Bond into outer space, Moonraker is good camp fun.
Yeah.
And I think people who are probably fans of the Roger Moore era probably will have seen this already, but if you haven't seen that and you're only familiar with the Daniel Craig Bond films, which are pretty serious, to their detriment, I would say, go back and check out some silliness from Roger Moore and friends. Okay, so next up we do move on from 1979 all the way to 2002 with Die Another Day. And as the rain picks up behind us on the roof, so we move on to the 20th James Bond film, the fourth and final film that Pierce Brosnan would do after a good 7 years as James Bond, and actually the film that would very nearly kill the franchise dead, as it would take 4 years to bring it back with Daniel Craig and a much sort of overhauled tone and approach to the films. This brings together three luminaries of the podcast, because we've previously reviewed films with Pierce Brosnan, Halle Berry and Rosamund Pike, all in their own separate terrible films, and they've all now converged to make the perfect bad film, so that should really give you an idea of where this is going. But first up, Pierce Brosnan, Bronholm, as previously discussed in The Lawnmower Man in a previous episode, and I would say he's a bit more calm in this film. He, actually, as James Bond, he did play it quite relaxed, and in most other films, he's screaming maniac. So at least he plays a subtle Bond, you could say. They go, for the first of many times, they go to the, quote, demilitarized zone of North Korea, I guess between North and South Korea. For a demilitarized zone, there's a lot of tanks and helicopters and army people. In fact, we're an army base in the demilitarized zone.
And ironically, they're hiding weapons there.
I'm not quite sure what the definition of demilitarized is in Korea. Probably a very loose one. We're introduced to the one of the main villains of the film, Colonel Moon, and he's kicking the shit out of a punching bag that's hanging from the ceiling, and then he unzips it, and a guy falls out of the punching bag. So. Ooh, he's hard. And then he tells his soldiers to get him another anger therapist, which is apparently what that is. He's joined by his henchman of the film, which is Zhao. We learn that Bond is posing as a sort of a diamond dealer, and that there's going to be a sort of a fake arms deal. So we'll swap you tanks for diamonds or something like that, and then. Also, there's a nice link here to Moonraker straight away. Some of the tanks are also hovercrafts. I didn't know that was a thing. And the reason why they're hovercrafts is because the demilitarized zone of Korea has got lots of landmines. So if you go over landmines in a hovercraft, you'll be fine. One of the soldiers that's looking at the diamonds gets a multimedia text message on his Sony Ericsson that's got a picture of Pierce Brosnan, and it says, James Bond, secret agent. He's like, oh. So his cover's blown, and along with that, pretty much everything else is blown. So Colonel Moon blows up the helicopter with an anti-tank gun. James Bond blows up the diamonds by touching his wristwatch.
Everything just gets destroyed.
Just kills loads of people. Things are blowing up left, right and centre. The military base blows up, helicopters, tanks. There's a hovercraft chase where Bond chases down Colonel Moon, and Colonel Moon ends up going over the edge of a waterfall, but Bond is just able to hold on to this sort of massive wooden battering ram, and he's hanging off it, and it's hitting a massive bell. And what does he say?
Saved by the Bell.
Saved by the Bell.
I wish I saw coming before it even happened.
You probably remember this from when you saw it in the cinema, though.
Oh yeah, 16 years ago, yeah.
Oh, you've revealed your age on air. I mean, but no sooner has he been saved than he's immediately captured and taken to a sort of prisoner of war camp in North Korea. We get this sort of montage then of what happens to him while he is in this prison camp. Without a shred of irony, we get a Madonna song played over footage of someone being tortured. I mean, undoubtedly, even if you don't think that this is the worst Bond film, which you should, no one can deny that the song Die Another Day by Madonna is not just the worst Bond theme, but one of the worst pieces of shit
It's awful.
ever created.
It's so bad.
Even for the time, in 2002, there was some really awful pop and dance music, but this is it's just this perfect storm of Madonna discovering shit dance music and vocoder, and the lyrics are super basic. They don't have anything to do with the film. Like,
any impact that the opening of this film had is just destroyed by this completely disjointed shit piece of music.
And under this music, we get this sort of terrible CGI of like scorpions crawling around, sort of people who are made of fire and people who are made of ice.
Yeah.
To suggest I don't know what. Diamonds, it's just like the old Bond opening credits were always great because they were not CGI.
They were organic, yeah. They didn't have all these terrible effects.
And this must be the most digital of them all, and it looks really shit.
Yeah.
And it goes on for fucking ever. They play the whole song. Another day, another day, another day.
It was towards the end,
stop,
like the
stop.
It came back in again, and I was just like, "Oh my god, why is it still going on?"
So I mean, to be fair, it can't possibly get any worse than that, and I would say that it doesn't, at least audibly. But we cut to 14 months later, and Pierce Brosnan is in his prison cell, and he looks like Robinson Crusoe, with like really long hair and a massive beard to indicate he's been in a prison camp. General Moon, which is the father of Colonel Moon, is in charge now, and he's trying to get some information on a Bond, and he sets up a firing squad, and he's like, "Who's your contact in the West? Somebody has betrayed you. I know who it is. Tell me." And he's like, "Oh, I don't know. But they end up swapping him. They trade him for Zhao, who, in the time that he's been held in a prison camp, Zhao has also been involved in some terrorism and been captured and brought back to Britain and then trained. In 14 months, all of that is happening.
Yeah.
We get Michael Madsen, for some reason, agreed to do this film in a really small role with hardly any speaking time. He must have been pretty down on his luck.
I totally didn't expect him to be in
2002, like...
Couldn't remember he was being in it.
It doesn't hardly gets any dialogue at all either, so I bet he'd rather forget this. Scrubbed from his IMDb. They scan James Bond in the quarantine centre, and yes, they can see he has been stung by many scorpions, as suggested in the CGI credits. And he has some sort of problem with his liver, which is how that they know that it's James Bond. It's definitely him. Judi Dench here, reprising her role as M from the previous couple of films. She's not in this too much. She does what she usually turns up to do, to revoke his 00 status. Yeah. What's my mission? You haven't got a mission. You're sacked.
Yeah.
You're going to have to go off and do stuff on your own, which is what always happens.
Prove yourself.
This always happens. Initially, she says she's going to send him to an evaluation centre in the Falklands. I don't know why. But he manages to fake a cardiac arrest. How the fuck do you do that? And then uses a defibrillator on the people who come to kindly resuscitate him, and then nearly shags a woman on the way out of hospital. Bear in mind, he hasn't shagged anyone yet, and we're about a quarter of an hour in.
Yeah.
So he has to at least suggest that if I weren't escaping from this hospital, I would definitely shag you. And she looks at him like, All right.
The only reason I haven't is because I was in jail for 14 months.
You would definitely love it, but I haven't got time. I've got to go. So he goes to Cuba. He does what you would expect him to do. He goes to a cigar factory and starts to make some contacts there. Goes to a local bar and has a mojito, as you do when you're in Cuba, I guess. And then we are introduced to the lovely Jinx, Halle Berry.
Walking out of the sea.
Coming out of the sea in an orange bikini. Now, I've got to imagine, like me, Mark, you're seeing this at 13 years old. I'm about 17 years old. This made a pretty big impact, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how long in film time it took from her first being on screen to them having sex.
Oh, I think record time for a Bond film. We're talking
a minute and a half, maybe less.
As soon as she comes out to sea, there's all this verbal foreplay. Not even really innuendo. It's just like, I'm going to be fucking you in a bit. Yeah, I'm sure you will. Yeah, undoubtedly you will. Yeah, of course.
Let's not even bother us. Like pretending it's not going to happen.
But this is the first of many references to other James Bond films. Believe it or not, there are 19 separate references to James Bond films in this film to celebrate the 20th anniversary.
Ah.
I didn't catch them all, but I caught quite a few, and this is a very obvious one. This is a reference to Dr. No, when Ursula Andress comes out of the sea in her very similar bikini.
Yeah.
And this is Halle Berry's homage to that scene. She says, I think she says, my friends call me Jinx, and he says, well, my friends call me James Bond. It's a weird deadpan moment.
Yeah.
I don't think it was meant to be funny.
Not exactly the cleverest line.
She quite rightly asks, what do you think you're doing looking at me with massive binoculars? And he says, well, actually, I'm an ornithologist. Now, this is a very obscure reference because the character James Bond is named after an author of ornithology books that Ian Fleming was a fan of, also called James Bond.
Oh, okay.
So the character of James Bond is named after a guy who wrote about birds, who was probably not very cool. So that's a reference to that. Like I said, some very strong innuendo leads to sex within seconds. Basically, they're in bed, they're going at it. Now you might have noticed quite a sexy bit here where Jinx, she pulls out a little knife and she's got a fig and she cuts the fig and she starts eating it. Pretty sexy, right? But what you didn't see was the take where Halle Berry choked on a fig and Pierce Brosnan had to give her the Heimlich manoeuvre.
Really?
On set.
Oh my god, that's ridiculous.
So, less sexy now.
Crazy trivia.
I had to scroll quite far down IMDb for that one. Also, another bit of trivia, and I don't know how this made the trivia page on IMDb, but allegedly Pierce Brosnan was in Ireland promoting the film, and someone in a pub came up to him and asked to shake his hand. And after he shook his hand, the guy said, that's the closest I'll ever get to Halle Berry's ass. Which I hope is true, but I don't think it would be.
I don't know why they would put it in there if it wasn't.
I would hate if that weren't true. But so there you go, some interesting Halle Berry trivia. And she also had to leave shooting during this film to go and accept her Oscar, which we mentioned at length when we reviewed her in Catwoman.
Yeah.
Which she didn't win an Oscar for, but she did. She was still riding high off of her Oscar win at this point. She just won an Oscar, and then she would do Die Another Day and Catwoman and Gothica, which we mentioned. Razzies. Yeah, which we talked about on our superhero spin-off episode, one of our early episodes. You can check that out. We did Catwoman and Supergirl. We talk about the highs and lows of Halle Berry quite a bit there, so I won't go into it all again. But needless to say, she's got some questionable performance in this film again. Now, there's a series of scenes here where it's just James Bond barging into someone's house or room and saying, Buenos dias, and then going again. He goes to this like private clinic in Cuba, which is where Zhao has been spotted. He walks past a series of mirrors, like a hall of mirrors, which I think is a reference to the man with the golden gun. Now, Zhao is there getting plastic surgery to turn him into a white guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which will come up again. but he's got diamonds embedded in his face from when the C4 went off in the briefcase. And then we're introduced to really the main villain of the film, a guy called Gustav Graves, who is a sort of a billionaire sort of playboy character who deals in diamonds, which have come up quite a bit in this film. Yeah, we're introduced to the third of our triple threat here, Rosamund Pike, playing Miranda Frost in this one. Rosamund Pike, we talked about her performance in Doom on our video game episode that we did a while back, and it was pretty terrible in that. It's pretty terrible in this as well. To be fair, this is her very first performance ever, so she will, I guess, get better one day. I lost track of her after Doom. I don't know what she's doing now. If anyone knows if she's gotten better, let us know.
If she's got worse, then please let us know. We're more interested.
Definitely. Please get in touch at Schlock Tactics and let us know about that. As if it wasn't bad enough being subjected to the music of Madonna, we are now subjected to the acting of Madonna. She plays a character I believe is called Verity, who is a fencing instructor. Now, considering that she only gets about 2 minutes of screen time here, this film was won or nominated for 3 Razzies, and they were all because of Madonna. So in 2 minutes, she was able to win. She was able to win the award for the worst supporting actress in like a minute and a half, 2 minutes of dialogue. And she was also nominated, I think this is a bit unfair, the worst actress of the decade.
For 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I mean, I don't know whether they're taking other films into account. I don't think she's done many films. And of course, she was nominated for Worst Original Song, which I think, if anything, she should have won the Worst Original Song, not the Worst Actress of the Decade.
2 minutes for a whole decade.
I mean, fucking, not even Halle Berry can do that. Right? And she also won some awards at the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, which I've not heard of. Again, Worst Supporting Actress, Most Distracting Celebrity Cameo Appearance, Worst Song or Song Performance in a Film. So yeah, if you look at the list of awards for this film, they are mostly credited to Madonna, and they are mostly not good. So, I mean, I don't think I can really even describe what she does in 2 minutes, but I mean, it is definitely not great. The only bit I remember is where she's talking about Miranda Frost, Rosamund Pike. She nearly took. She'd won the gold medal at the Sydney Olympic Games, and Bond says, "Well, that was by default, though, wasn't it?" And then Madonna says, "Well, yes, because her opponent OD'd on steroids." OD'd on steroids? What the fuck is ODing on steroids? I've never heard of that, and I am a big fan of professional wrestling, and I have never heard of anyone ODing on steroids. But yeah, that's all this fencing is about. Gustav Graves challenges Bond to a fencing match. And this is what my brother would call willy waving in the extreme. This is macho bullshit.
Yeah.
And it starts off with fencing with masks on, and then it gets a bit more serious, and they take the masks off, and then they start using actual swords, like cutlasses. Then they start using like medieval broadswords. We really get a history of the sword in 2 minutes in this fight sequence. The rules are traditional: first blood drawn from the torso. Like I said, cutlasses, samurai swords, broadswords, all sorts of shit going on here. It's quite a fun little fight sequence, if overblown and ridiculous. And Bond ends up winning, draws blood from the torso, and then gets invited to Iceland for the demonstration of the Icarus project that Gustav is going to be doing.
We get John Cleese and his gadgets.
Yeah, John Cleese is actually his first time being Q. The World Is Not Enough, he played exactly the same character, but was called R. I don't know why.
Which is weird.
Yeah. To get to this bit, you have to go into an abandoned tube station, which is the secret MI6 base that nobody knows about. There's this sort of simulation software again, virtual reality. Pierce Brosnan has been here before, but he's this simulation program where you can it looks like M is getting held hostage, and he shoots the guy holding her hostage, and then you think M's been shot, and then he takes off his VR glasses, and it's all a test. It's all a training sequence. This is the stuff he was going to be doing in the Falklands, perhaps more high tech here in London. He would have been chasing sheep in the Falklands, maybe. We get a bunch of references to old Bond films stuffed in here. We get the jetpack from Thunderball that Sean Connery once hilariously piloted. We get the shoe from Russia with Love with the little knife that comes out of the toe. Yeah. You can stab people with it. And we get the main gadget for this film, which is the Aston Martin Vanquish, or should I say Vanish, because it's an invisible car. Yeah. We find out that Miranda Frost, who's like the PA for Gustav Graves, is also an MI6 agent, and she's having a chat with Judi Dench. She's really hyped up on her ability to resist the sexual advances of James Bond. This is how an interview goes. If you're applying to work with James Bond, it's would you? And she goes, definitely not. Definitely not. I would never shag James Bond. Will she or won't she? We'll find out later. Bond goes to Iceland. Miranda Frost is also there with Gustav Graves, but undercover. And Jinx is also there. Halle Berry's popped back up as well from Cuba. She's resurfaced in Iceland somehow. And then we finally get... I'm not going to be generous and call it a twist, but we get the reveal that Gustav Graves is actually Colonel Moon. He is a Korean man who's had genetic therapy to turn him into a white man, complete with a posh white accent. Yeah. Very strange. I mean, I know it, we saw earlier that Sao was going to be made into a white bloke, but I think anybody watching that for the first time would be like, oh, well, that's obviously not going to happen. But then we realised that for this whole film, Gustav Graves was Colonel Moon, and he was never killed in Korea. He was just taken away to become like a Richard Branson type character. Yeah. Which is kind of unexpected. I wouldn't say is a massive twist, but I feel sorry for the actual Korean actor, who was must have been told he was going to be playing the main Bond villain, and then maybe got about a third of the way through the script and was like, so who's Gustav Graves then?
Sorry, we decided to use a white British person.
Yeah. We lost confidence in the North Korean villain halfway through. Sorry. Bond raises an alarm by accident because he's a shit spy. He bumps into Miranda around the corner, and they did what a lot of people do in films when they're being chased by people. They start getting off with each other, because what you can never do in films is interrupt anybody who's kissing. Like, isn't that the guy we're meant to be chasing? Well, maybe, but he's getting off with a woman, so we should probably leave him alone. Why does this always happen in films? There's someone coming, kiss me, and then they won't recognise me. It's bizarre. Miranda, still claiming to resist the charms of Bond, says, I know what you're like. Sex for dinner, death for breakfast. Which is actually a legitimately quite good line. And what happens next?
They have sex. For dinner.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to have sex with you, okay. Oh, maybe I will. Yeah. As happens in every Bond film. I mean, at least she put up a little bit of reluctancy to this sexual predator. But there you go. Bond shags Frost, as expected. While Jinx sleuths about, he confronts Graves, and then Miranda comes in and also points a gun at Graves, but then she turns and she points the gun at Bond, and we realise that Miranda was always a double agent. She was never working for MI6, and she was the one who got him captured in Korea, and it's all coming out now. Bond uses one of his favourite gadgets in this film, which is the ring that he wears around his finger, which if you twist it and put it onto glass, it'll make the entire pane of glass shatter, which is quite cool. I think it's probably the best gadget in this film. Yeah. Luckily, he's on a glass floor, so he can just lean down, press the floor, and away you go. Bond gets in the super fast car that he's able to escape from the solar death ray. But then he gets to the edge of a cliff, and he's hanging off the edge of the cliff, and all these bits of metal are hanging off of the really fast car.
Oh, what's he going to do?
And I think probably many people have seen this scene in the film if they haven't seen anything else. This is the scene where James Bond grabs a large curved piece of metal, and he's, would you call it wakeboarding or parasailing?
Kite surfing, I suppose.
Kite surfing. Call it what you will. He surfs on a bit of metal with a parachute that he got from somewhere.
Yeah.
Or from the car, I guess.
This is peak ridiculousness of this film. Like,
I would say it's on a par with films like Ice Age or Happy Feet for how much reality is on screen.
yeah.
The only thing that is live action here is a little bit of James Bond's face squinting. Everything else is completely digital, and it's of the time, 2002. People were going fucking mental with green screens, and this is what was happening here.
Yeah.
This is Pierce Brosnan's face superimposed upon a video game, basically. I thought this would have been a good time to end the film, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen.
Started to drag after this.
Yeah. It dragged on here. We went back to Korea. Jinx and Bond infiltrate Gustav Graves' plane. Graves has got this power armor on for some reason. He finally reveals to General Moon that he is in fact his son. I am a Korean man. I am your son. His father's not really happy with this, so he kills him. It goes off the rails now. There's two quite good fight sequences, hand-to-hand fight sequences. Bond fights Graves, complete with his electrocuting power armor. And then what I really quite enjoyed was Miranda and Jinx have a fight on the airplane, where like Miranda's got like a sword and she looks like a villain from like a Japanese anime.
Yeah.
And Jinx looks like Colonel Guile. She's got like a green vest and like cargo trousers on, and she's got little knives and stuff. I thought it was kind of quite video game and ridiculous, but I quite enjoyed it. I thought they put on a much better fight than the men did. The men are just wrestling around being zapped by like purple lightning every now and then.
Yeah.
Graves gets chucked at the side of the plane into the jet engine, and Bond says, it's say hello to gravity or something like that.
Time to face gravity.
Face gravity, something shit.
And then you got a bit of Moneypenny at the end.
Oh yeah.
The simulation.
Yeah, money. You see,
random.
Finally, Moneypenny and James Bond start to get off with each other, and it's then revealed she was just using the VR goggles from earlier on in the film.
Yeah, and that's it.
What the purpose of this was?
Strange way to end the film.
And then we get the remix of Madonna over the title, the end credits. At which point we just had to leave the room and compose ourselves.
Yeah.
So here it is. What a mess. Die Another Day. What are your overall impressions of this film?
Oh, it's a mess, as you've said. There's loads of action, but it's just there's the story, if there is one, is very vague. Doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
It drags on at the end. Yeah, it's just pants.
Yeah, absolutely. It was terrible then, and it's terrible now. It is, one of the worst films ever made. I don't know if it's a low point for Brosnan, Berry, and Pike. That's perhaps another discussion, but it certainly goes to show that as individuals they are all terrible.
Yeah.
And when you combine them, you get a terrible film. So if anyone doubted that, they know it now. We've covered it. Yeah, like you say, it's just all noise, really, isn't it? It's all things blowing up every 2 minutes. But if that was a Schwarzenegger film, it would be great. But because this is 2002 and it's meant to be a James Bond film, it's not great. And the one-liners are not funny. They're all universally terrible. Pretty much all the dialogue is terrible all the way through.
Yeah.
And it's delivered terribly. The exception of Judi Dench is okay. John Cleese obviously is fine, but they're the bit players. They're not able to give such a memorable performance in 2 minutes as Madonna was able to. Yeah, it's just all noise all the way through. Nonsense plot, nonsense acting, nonsense dialogue.
A lot of the characters are just pretty crap, the villains and stuff.
It's kind of it's a parody of a James Bond film, but even more than Roger Moore's worst or Sean Connery's worst.
Yeah.
Moonraker and Diamonds Are Forever are sort of parodies of Bond films. But this is even Austin Powers is better than this, and that is obviously a very deliberate parody of these films. But I think perhaps you catch Bond here in an awkward in-between between Austin Powers films made James Bond films look ridiculous, but before the Daniel Craig films would make them look legitimate again. So it's this sort of wasteland, unfortunately, for Pierce Brosnan that did away with him as James Bond, and it would take quite a few years to get the franchise back on track. So if you had to send one of these films to an evaluation centre in the Falklands, or send one of these films into outer space to be preserved for future generations, which would you send to the Falklands? Which would you send to space?
I think I would send Die Another Day to the Falklands.
Yeah.
And I would send Moonraker to be preserved. I think Die Another Day is the worst Bond film.
Yeah.
But for me, I prefer the badness to be that kind of campy old style of Bond.
Yeah.
I get a bit more enjoyment in a fun way rather than just thinking this is trashy and like I don't have any desire to see this again.
Just unredeemable.
Whereas Moonraker I would actually watch again, and
Yeah.
it is like slow and a bit boring in places, but it's generally quite enjoyable, even though it's campy and ridiculous and silly and schlocky.
But that was kind of the genre of Bond films back then in the
Yeah.
70s. And
late 70s, early 80s Bond was kind of what was happening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I sort of double think whether maybe we should have done Diamonds Are Forever now, because I watched Moonraker again. I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it.
I remembered it being crap, and it often shows up in lists as being a crap James Bond film. But for the most part, I thought it was quite good fun.
Yeah, it's not
But,
bad.
like you say, our perceptions of bad films and good films have been very warped, particularly since doing this podcast.
Yeah.
I would say you could maybe chuck the third act of Moonraker in the bin, and I'd be quite happy with that. But Die Another Day, I would be happy to chuck it all in the bin. There's nothing good about this, nothing redeemable. It's just a waste of time, waste of space, waste of money. Yeah, Moonraker may have cost 34 million, but it was pretty fun. So yeah. Did you know actually they considered doing a spin-off of Die Another Day with just Jinx in the film?
Really?
Halle Berry, yeah. Queen of the spin-offs. They were considering doing that, but the poor box office performance of Die Another Day put a stop to that. But Halle Berry has gone on record as saying she would still like to play Jinx again in a Bond film, or any film. And she said she'll do it for free.
What?
Yeah.
Is she desperate? Like,
I think so. If anyone wants to make that film, Halle Berry will do it for free. So I'll make that film if Halle Berry still wants to come and do it. We'll film it in Bristol here. It'll be great. But yeah, she's still out there and she still wants to do a Jinx film, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think maybe she'll have to pay to do it. That character is doomed by this film. So, recommendations in terms of Bond films. I have a very simple formula for everyone out there. If it has the word gold or golden in the title, it's fucking brilliant. So that's Goldfinger, GoldenEye, and Man with the Golden Gun. And also if it has the word live or living in the title, it's also pretty fucking brilliant. So that's You Only Live Twice, Live and Let Die, and The Living Daylights. Those 6 Bond films are pretty much the cream of the crop and pretty much all you need. And The Spy Who Loved Me is brilliant as well. So I would chuck that one in there as well. So, if you want to let us know what you thought of either of these films, let us know what you think is the worst Bond film, is the best Bond film, who's your favourite Bond, get in touch and let us know. You can get in touch with us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Schlock Tactics. We did get a little bit of feedback here on Instagram from Lee Shannon81. Gives us a bit of trivia. Apparently Die Another Day cost 142 million to make, and he's convinced that the filmmakers spent most of that money on drugs. And gives us a quote from Roger Moore about Die Another Day. I thought it went too far, and that's from me, the first Bond in space. So a bit of savagery there from Sir Roger Moore. Subscribe to the podcast. We release usually 2 episodes a month, and you'll be the first to know when we do release those. And if you could give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, that would also be great. But yeah, that has been another episode of Schlock Tactics, the James Bond special. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our Christmas special, which you'll definitely want to check out while you're off over the festive period. That'll be one for you to stick on while you're putting up the decorations or cooking the